Hello there friends, it's Ashley here from the Loopy Lamb and theloopylamb.com, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a tutorial on how to make a chunky crochet scarf for kids. Now this pattern was designed using the Caron spice cakes that are available at Michael's, but you could also use an alternative super bulky weight yarn. The size that we're going to be doing today is a child size scarf. If you're looking for this pattern written in the adult size, it is available in the PDF that is available in both my Ravelry and Etsy shops. That also includes the child size. The child size scarf measures approximately 6 inches wide and 55 inches long. To follow along with today's tutorial, you're going to need a ruler, a tapestry needle, or instead of a ruler, you could also have a measuring tape. I'm using a P or 10 millimeter crochet hook, and you'll also need a pair of scissors. And as I've already kind of touched on, we're using the Yarnspirations Caron Spice Cakes. This is the color Indiegogo that I'll be using today. And if you're wanting to substitute another super bulky weight yarn for this Caron Spice Cake, you're going to need approximately 157 yards to crochet the child size scarf. And the color I've made my sample here in is the color Brainwave. So if you're ready to get started, please hit that like button and please consider subscribing to this channel. I'm going to clear my space here, adjust our camera, and then we're ready to get started. So now that we're ready to start our scarf, we're going to grab the tail end of our yarn and we're going to create a slip knot. To do that, we're going to hold the tail end of our yarn in our hand like so, and we're just going to pin it down with our thumb so it's not going to go anywhere on us. Then we're going to take our working side of our yarn, and working side means it's attached to the ball of yarn, and we're going to wrap it around our 2 fingers. Like so. And then when we come around to the front, we're going to cross it over the strand of yarn that's already on our fingers. Then we're going to rotate our whole hand. And then I'm going to use my ring finger to pin that strand of yarn down. So when you're looking at your hand, you have 2 strands of yarn on your fingers. Then we're going to grab our crochet hook and we're going to insert our hook under the first strand, over the second strand, and then we're going to use that hook to pull the second strand out under the first strand and off of our fingers and onto the crochet hook. Then we're going to pull both strands of the yarn tight, and then we're going to grab the working yarn and pull the yarn until the knot is up snug against your crochet hook. You don't want it to be too tight. You need to be able to move that around. So if you can do this on your crochet hook, you're good to go. So to start our scarf, we're going to create a chain of 125. And I just remembered that I should mention to you the gauge that you're going to need to meet for this scarf. The gauge for this pattern is 9 stitches by 7 rows equals 4 inches. Now gauge isn't vital to the pattern. You can continue to crochet the scarf without checking your gauge. However, making sure that you do match gauge will ensure that your scarf is the exact size that I've given to you at the beginning of this pattern, as well as ensuring that you will be using the appropriate amount of yarn. If you don't match gauge, that's totally fine, but you just might use more or less yarn than I've mentioned here in the pattern. So we're going to do a chain of 125 to start our child scarf. To do our chain, we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook and then pull the yarn through the loop on our hook. That's 1 chain. Then we're going to do that again. Wrap the yarn around the hook, which is called a yarn over, and then we're going to pull that yarn over through the loop on our hook. You now have 2 chains. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through again, and that's 3. We're going to continue to do this until we have 125 chains. So if you'd like to pause your video, you can do that now until you have 125 chains, and you can come and meet me back here. You will notice in the next screen that my sample will be much smaller than yours. In order to make sure it's easier for you to see, I'm making a smaller sample today so that way we can keep this camera as zoomed in as possible while we're working so you can see the stitches better. So if you'd like to pause your video now, I'll meet you back here in just a few moments to show you how we're going to work on row 1 of our scarf. So now that we have our chain of 125 complete, we're ready to start with row 1. And now row 1 will be the wrong side of our work. Now we're going to start working in the second chain from the hook. So we never count the loop that's on our hook. We're going to skip this first chain and we're going to work into this second chain here. And you can identify your chains by the little V shape that they make here. And we're going to start with a half double crochet in the second chain from the hook. So I'm going to place my finger on that second chain so that way I know where I'm going to be placing my hook, and I'm ready to start my half double crochet. To do that, we're going to wrap our yarn around our hook, and then we're going to insert our hook into that second chain, the one where I left my finger. That's our second chain. So I'm going to insert my hook into the middle of that chain. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. You should have 3 loops on your hook. Then we're going to yarn over hook again, and we're going to pull through all 3 loops on your hook. And that's your first half double crochet. Now, if this is your very first scarf or your very first time crocheting, I would recommend having a stitch marker handy, because I find that it's easy when you're first starting to lose the first and last stitches. So you could put a stitch marker into that first stitch there, so that way you don't lose it in your next round. You don't have to do that. It's just something that you can do to help keep track later. So now we're going to place 1 half double crochet into each remaining chain across. So we'll do our next half double crochet. I'm going to yarn over and insert the hook into the next chain. Then we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. You should have 3 loops on your hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. And that is your next half double crochet. And then we're going to do this in every chain across. So at the end, you should have 124 stitches across. And so I'll show you the half double crochet a couple of more times here. So we're going to yarn over, insert into the very next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, 3 loops on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Then we'll yarn over and insert into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, 3 loops on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops to complete our stitch. So if you'd like to pause your video and work 1 half double crochet into each chain across, at the end of the row, you should have 124 stitches. So I'll meet you back here at the end of this row and show you how we're going to move on to row 2. So I just finished my last stitch of row 1 and I'm ready to move on to row 2. To do that, we're going to yarn over and pull through the loop on our hook to create a chain 1. Then we're going to turn our work and we're ready to start row 2. Now row 2, we're going to work into the tops of the previous stitches from row 1. And so the last stitch from the last row becomes our first stitch of this row. So now we have our chain 1. It does not count as a stitch. We're going to be doing what's called a half double crochet in the 3rd loop. Now, in some patterns, this stitch will be worked through the 3rd loop on the back, and sometimes it's through the 3rd loop in the front. And the stitch I'm showing you today, we're going to be working through the 3rd loop on the front. Now, when you look at your stitch, this is the top of your stitch and you have these little V's here. Now, if you look at the side of the work that's facing you, you can also see a little V here on your work. This bottom loop here is your 3rd loop. So we're going to do this stitch working through and under that loop. So we're going to half double crochet in the 3rd loop of our first stitch. So we're going to yarn over and insert our hook up and pick up that 3rd loop. Then you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop, and you'll have 3 loops on your hook at this point. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. And now what this does is by working through that 3rd loop, it pushes those top 2 strands that create the V, it pushes it forward and it creates a ridge on the top of your work that looks very similar to a knit stitch. So that's why we're doing it this way, is we want to have those little ridges. And so I'll continue to show you how to do this again. We're working under the third loop. We're going to half double crochet into the next stitch. So we're going to yarn over and insert our hook up and under that third loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. And so we'll do this a couple more times, and then I'll turn the work around so that way you can see the tops of the stitches being pushed forward a little bit easier once we have a few more stitches. So again, here's the front of our work. We're going to yarn over and insert up and under that third loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Into the next stitch, we're going to yarn over, insert under the third loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And we're going to do this into every stitch across the row. I'm just going to do a couple more here so I can turn the work around and show you what this is doing. So this is what our work should look like at this point. The side that's facing you should look flat like this, but when you turn your work over, you should see these little V's that are popping off the top of your work. All right, and so that's what we're creating by working to that third loop. So if you'd like to pause your video and work 1 half double crochet into the third loop of each stitch across, I'll meet you here at the end of the round, or the end of the row, I should say, and I'll show you how we're going to move on to row 3. There should be no changes in your stitch count at the end of this row. You should still have 124 stitches. So I'll meet you back here in just a few moments when we're ready to move on to row 3. So before I do my last stitch of row 2, I just want to pop back in and mention the stitch marker. So I have the stitch marker in the top of my stitch here, but when you continue to work, especially with a yarn that's variegated like this, it can sometimes be tricky to keep track of that first and the last round. So I placed that stitch marker here. I can now find that stitch. I know it's still hanging out there, so I'll move that stitch marker and then just work my half double crochet into the third loop. It can be a little trickier on these last stitches here because they want to curve in on themselves a little bit. So if you can also put the stitch marker in that third loop if you find that it is helpful in subsequent rows. So now we're ready to move on to row 3. To do that, we're going to yarn over and chain up 1 and turn our work. Now you can see those lovely V's on top of our work here, and we're ready to keep going. So again, that chain 1 does not count as a stitch, and we're going to work the half double crochet in the third loop into each stitch across. And now we're going to be working into the third loop again on the front of the work. We should never be flipping our work over in this pattern to work into the back third loop. We want this third loop here that's on the front of our work. So we're going to yarn over and insert up and under that third loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3. And so what this does by continuing to do these half double crochets in the third loop and using always the third loop on the front, we're now creating those V's on the back. So that way the scarf has the same texture on both sides of our work. So now I have 2 half double crochets in the third loop. I'm going to yarn over and insert into the third loop of the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And I'm going to continue to work that half double crochet in the third loop all the way across my piece. Again, we're going to continue to have 124 stitches at the end of this row. So if you'd like to pause your video and meet me back here at the end of row 3, I'll meet you back here at the end and show you how to move on to row 4. So I just finished my last stitch of row 3, and before we move on to row 4, I just wanted to pause and give you a peek of what your project should look like at this point. Obviously yours will be much bigger, but at the end of row 3 with this side facing you, you'll have 1 set of the raised ridge here, and then when you flip your work over, you'll have a raised ridge on the back as well. So rows 4 through 10 are all worked the same way for our scarf. And I'll show you the instructions one more time, and you'll follow these instructions for the remaining rows of the scarf, rows 4 through 10. So you're going to yarn over and chain up 1 and turn your work. And then you're going to work 1 half double crochet in the 3rd loop into each stitch across. And again, you're going to yarn over, insert up and through that 3rd loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, and yarn over, pull through all 3. And you're going to work this into each stitch across. And you're going to do this for rows 3 through 10. Now I'm going to continue to work my rows, for rows 4 through 10, I should say, not 3 through 10. We already did 3. So we're going to continue this for rows 4 through 10. And I'm going to do that here. If you'd like to pause your video and work rows 4 through 10, doing this half double crochet in the 3rd loop. I'll meet you back here at the end of row 10 because I want to show you how we're going to finish off, and then we're going to be adding some fringe to our scarf. So I'll continue to work on my project here, and I'll meet you back here in just a few moments at the end to show you how we're going to finish this off. So I just finished my last stitch of row 10, and we're ready to finish off with our scarf. So I'm going to remove my hook, and I'm going to cut my yarn, a tail of yarn, probably about 4 to 6 inches long. And then I'm going to pull that tail through the loop that was on my hook, and then I'm just going to pull that yarn tight. Okay. And so this is the wrong side of the fabric here. You can see that we have a large gap on the side here that doesn't have any ridges, but when we turn our work over to the right side, you can see that we have 4 evenly spaced ridges. Now the texture on the back is very similar, but this is the right side of the fabric with the evenly spaced ridges. Now, if you wanted to continue to make this scarf wider, you could continue to repeat the same rows that we just did for rows 4 through 10, just working in that half double crochet in the 3rd loop. But a 6-inch scarf is a really great scarf size or width for a child. So now that we have finished off our scarf, we're ready to add our fringe. And this is where you're going to need to use your ruler or your measuring tape. I love a ruler for this because we're going to be cutting yarn to lengths of 12 inches. And this ruler is 12 inches, so it makes it really easy to do. So we're going to grab our scissors and we're going to grab our yarn, and we're going to cut 40 pieces of yarn to 12 inches in length. So I'm just going to line up one end of the yarn to the one end of the ruler. I'm going to gently stretch the yarn. I don't want it to be super tight. We want to be relaxed and measuring up to 12 inches. So then I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to cut the yarn at 12 inches. And I'm going to continue this until I have 40 pieces of yarn. So now that I have my yarn, my yarn cut for my fringe or my tassels here, I'm going to take 2 pieces of the yarn that I cut 12 inches, and I'm going to fold them in half to meet the ends together. Okay. Then we're going to be working along the short end of our scarf, and we're going to insert our fringe along this short edge. So I'm going to work through starting with the last stitch here. I'm going to insert my hook from back to front, and then I'm going to grab the center point of those 2 pieces of yarn that I folded in half, and I'm going to pull it through the fabric to the back. And try not to catch any of the yarn of my actual scarf on the way. Just give me 1 second here. I'm sorry, friends. We had a technical issue while I was filming while attaching the first piece of fringe, and we've lost the footage. So I'm going to show you how to attach the fringe here, starting in the 2nd row. And you'll see that I already have the fringe attached to the 1st row of the short end of our scarf. So now I'm going to do my next piece of fringe here on my scarf. And again, I've got the 2 pieces of yarn held together, and I'm going to fold it in half so the ends are meeting. Then I'm going to grab the middle of the loop, and I'm going to insert my crochet hook into the end of the next row on the short end of my scarf. And then I'm going to place that loop onto my crochet hook. I'm going to hold that yarn on my hook tight so that way I can pull it through the scarf to the back a little easier. Then I'm going to grab the loop that's on the back of the fabric now, grab the tails from the front and pull it through the loop. Then holding on to my project, I'm going to pull those tails tight until I have a nice clean knot on the top. And so again, we've got 40 pieces of yarn. That means you're going to be using 20 pieces per side. You can adjust that number if you'd like more or less fringe, but we've got 10 rows, so you should be placing 1 of these little pieces of fringe into the end of each row. Now at the end of attaching all of our fringe, I'm just going to go ahead and use my scissors to trim all of the ends to be as even as possible. And then once I'm done, I'm going to steam block my scarf. I'll just place this on the blocking board that I have, or I just use one of those kind of rubber gym mats. And then I'll use a steamer to just lightly steam it. I just kind of finger block it after it's steamed, so it's nice and square. Let it dry, and then you're ready to wear your children's scarf. Now, I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, please hit that like button, and please consider subscribing to this channel. If you have any comments or questions, I would love to hear from you. Please leave them in the comments section below. If you enjoy free crochet patterns, please check out my blog, theloopylamb.com. Thank you so much for watching, friends. Happy hooking, and I'll see you next time.